Hello! If you like stories like this, subscribe to this channel to not miss new videos.
There was nothing unusual about that Friday evening. I had just finished teaching a long week of restless children who already had their minds on the summer holidays. My feet ached, my throat was raw from too many instructions, and all I wanted was a quiet night with Elias, a bowl of soup, and maybe a chapter from the book I'd been too tired to touch all week. I was in the kitchen, ladling lentil soup into 2 bowls, when Elias rummaged through his briefcase like a man who had forgotten something important. I paid him little attention. He was always misplacing pens or receipts. But then I saw the slip of paper in his hand, creased and worn at the edges. "What's that?" I asked, smiling at the ridiculousness of it. "A lottery ticket," he said, almost sheepishly. I laughed. "You? Playing the lottery?" Elias had always called gambling foolish, a waste of hard-earned money. He was the steady one, the rational one, the man who checked price tags and frowned at impulse buys. I loved him for it, most of the time. He shrugged, eyes on the television where the winning numbers were flashing across the screen. "I just bought it on a whim." I placed the bread on the table and teased, "Well, maybe this is the night we become millionaires." The words were a joke, just words. But then Elias's face changed. His hand froze, his mouth parted. He whispered, "1 number, 2, 3. His voice grew strangled, his eyes darting between the ticket and the screen. By the 4th number, the soup spoon slipped from his hand and clattered against the bowl. I frowned. "What is it?" "Miriam." He was trembling now, and I felt the air leave my lungs before he even finished. "We won. We just won $7 million. For a moment, I thought he was joking, playing a cruel prank. But when he shoved the ticket at me, his hands shaking, I saw it. Every number matched perfectly. The room seemed to tilt. My knees weakened. I sat down hard in the chair, staring at him, then the ticket, then back at him. "No," I said, though the evidence was undeniable. This can't be real." But it was. The soup went cold on the table. We didn't eat that night. Instead, we sat in stunned silence, the ticket lying between us like some kind of divine relic. I thought of debts, of security, of how my parents would never need to worry about money again. I thought of children in my classroom who couldn't afford shoes without holes. I thought of finally breathing without the weight of bills pressing down every month. But alongside the gratitude, fear crept in. Money that large, it wasn't just numbers. It was change. Change we hadn't asked for. Change I wasn't sure we were prepared to carry. Elias, though, seemed electrified. He couldn't stop pacing, muttering about what it meant, what we could do. His eyes were alive, brighter than I had seen them in years. "Miriam, do you understand? We'll never struggle again. We'll have anything we want. Anything." I smiled because I wanted to share in his joy. But something about the way he said it unsettled me. The following days swept us up like a storm. Papers to sign, identities to prove, banks and officials to meet. Elias took time off work, his life suddenly revolving around numbers far larger than the spreadsheets he once managed. I still went to school each morning, facing chalkboards and restless children, but I moved through the hours in a daze. The other teachers whispered behind my back, their voices dripping with envy and curiosity. When I came home, Elias was a different man. He sat at the computer late into the night, scrolling through listings for cars and houses, watches, and holidays. He talked about investments, advisors, and new acquaintances whose names I didn't recognize. I wanted to talk about practical things, helping our families, saving for the future, maybe traveling somewhere we had always dreamed of but could never afford. But when I spoke of these things, Elias's answers were distracted, half listened to. His mind was already somewhere else. 2 weeks later came the gala. He insisted we go. He told me it's important to meet people. He adjusted the cufflinks he had bought just for the occasion. We belong in those circles now. Belong? I echoed, confused. Elias never cared about circles before. He handed me a credit card and told me to buy a dress, something elegant. The words stung. I had dresses. I had clothes that had served me well for years, but apparently they weren't good enough anymore. I bought the dress, but when I looked at myself in the mirror, draped in something too shiny, too polished, I didn't see myself. The gala was everything I had feared. Chandeliers, glittering jewelry, people speaking in tones thick with arrogance. I felt like an imposter, clutching my glass of champagne as though it were a shield. Elias, on the other hand, was radiant. He laughed too loudly, boasted too freely, and drank in the admiration of strangers as if it were oxygen. I stood in the corner and watched as women touched his arm, as men clapped his back. He had never looked so alive or so far from me. When we got home, he was buzzing with excitement. Did you see the way they treated us? Like royalty, Miriam. Like we've finally arrived. I forced a smile, but inside, unease tightened like a knot in my stomach. He was already speaking as if our old lives were beneath him, as if the people we had been no longer mattered. That night, as he slept beside me, breathing evenly, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I should have been happy. We had everything people dream of: security, freedom, wealth beyond measure. But all I could feel was fear. Fear that the man beside me, the man I had shared 15 steady, loving years with, was slipping away into someone I did not recognize. And I wondered, in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, if what we had been given was not a blessing, but the beginning of a curse. The first weeks after the win passed in a blur, but as the dust settled, I began to notice the ways our lives were changing. Small at first, then sharper, louder, harder to ignore. The biggest change was Elias himself. He was restless, constantly searching for something to occupy his mind. Where once he had been a man of predictable routines, his morning coffee, his orderly desk at work, his nightly walks with me through the park, now he was consumed by thoughts of more. More investments, more connections, more things to buy. He bought a Mercedes almost immediately, a sleek black machine that purred like a predator. I remember the way he looked at it the first time he slid into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel like a man clutching a throne. "Do you like it?" he asked me, his voice almost boyish with pride. "It's beautiful," I admitted, and it was. But as I sat beside him, the leather seats smelling unfamiliar and cold, I couldn't help thinking of our old, battered Toyota, the one that had carried us through countless road trips, where we had sung along to the radio and laughed at our own off-key voices. This car didn't invite laughter. It demanded silence. Elias began spending long hours away from home. At first, he said it was meetings with financial advisors. Then it became networking dinners. He would come home late, smelling of wine and expensive cologne, his eyes bright, his words tumbling out in rapid stories about people I didn't know. "They say there's an opportunity in real estate. If I play it right, we can double what we have in less than a year." I looked at him over the stack of neatly folded shirts. Do we need more? Elias, we already have enough to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. He gave me a look I had never seen before, a mixture of impatience and something sharper. Comfort isn't enough anymore. Don't you want to see how far we can go? I wanted to tell him that I didn't need to go anywhere, that I was happiest in our modest apartment, with our simple dinners and quiet routines. But I bit my tongue. He was so animated, so alive, and I didn't want to dim that light. Still, inside me, a heaviness grew. The changes came to our home as well. Elias insisted we move to a larger apartment, one with glass windows overlooking the city and a balcony big enough for parties. I resisted at first. Our little apartment had been filled with memories, the walls soaked in laughter and tears. But Elias was relentless, and soon we were signing papers for a place twice the size, gleaming with marble floors and stainless steel appliances I didn't know how to use. Boxes of our old life were stacked in corners. Some of them Elias never even bothered to unpack. He filled the new shelves with things instead: crystal vases, designer furniture, gadgets that blinked and hummed. The chipped ceramic bowl I had made in college, the one that had held fruit on our table for years, was shoved into a cabinet and forgotten. I walked through the new apartment like a guest in someone else's home. Everything was beautiful, yes, but sterile. The warmth of our old life had been traded for shine and polish. Friends and family began to drift too. Some came too close, asking for favors, loans, introductions. Others withdrew, resentful or envious. The circle around us shifted, filled now with people who dressed too perfectly and laughed too loudly at Elias's jokes. At dinner parties, I sat quietly while Elias soaked in their admiration. He spoke about deals and opportunities, about the right connections, and how money could open every door if you were bold enough. I watched him from across polished tables, his face animated in the candlelight. He seemed like a stranger wearing my husband's skin. Sometimes I would reach for his hand under the table, the way I always used to, but more often than not, his hand wasn't there. Busy gesturing, holding a glass, or resting too close to the women who leaned toward him with practiced smiles. The first lie came quietly. It was a Thursday evening. He called to say he'd be late, a meeting with investors. I nodded, though he couldn't see me through the phone, and told him to be careful. Hours later, when he came home, he tossed his jacket on the chair, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I picked it up and found a folded receipt in the pocket, a restaurant bill from a place across town. There were 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, but he hadn't mentioned dinner. I stared at the receipt for a long time, my stomach twisted, but I told myself stories to ease the ache. Perhaps he had eaten with a colleague. Perhaps he had been too tired to explain. Perhaps it was nothing. But a seed had been planted. Nights became lonelier. I would sit in the new living room, surrounded by all the things money had bought, and feel emptier than I had in our tiny apartment. I began to notice the way Elias's eyes wandered when we were out, how quickly he laughed at a stranger's touch on his arm, how little he noticed the silences between us. One evening, I tried to speak. "Elias, don't you think we've changed?" He looked up from his phone, distracted. "Changed how?" "We used to be us, just us. Now it feels like we're chasing something I don't understand." He frowned, irritation flashing across his face. You don't understand because you're still thinking small. We can't go back to that life, Miriam. We're not the same anymore." The words cut deeper than he knew. I wanted to tell him that I didn't care about going back, that I only cared about holding on to him, but the space between us had already widened, and I felt myself slipping, helpless, into silence. Late at night, when Elias was out at yet another meeting, I would sit on the balcony of the new apartment and stare out at the city lights. From up here, the world looked different, shiny, distant, untouchable. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to remember the warmth of our walks in the park, the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery, the laughter in our small kitchen. Those memories felt fragile now, like glass about to shatter. And deep inside, a quiet dread whispered that I was losing him. Not to another woman, not yet, but to something far more dangerous. I was losing him to the hunger of wealth, a hunger that seemed endless. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake in our new apartment, staring at the ceiling while the city lights spilled through the wide glass windows. The bed beside me often remained empty until late. Sometimes Elias came home at 2 a.m, smelling of wine and smoke, his tie loosened, his shirt wrinkled. He always had explanations ready. Meetings ran late. Investors wanted to celebrate. Opportunities don't wait for convenient hours. I wanted to believe him. I told myself again and again that he was simply swept up in this new world of wealth and responsibility. But doubt had already begun to gnaw at me, slow and relentless. The first lie, the one that I could not smooth over with excuses, came one rainy evening. Elias had said he was meeting a potential real estate partner for dinner. I asked if he wanted me to come, half hoping he would say yes. But he laughed. "This isn't the kind of dinner you'd enjoy, Mariam. Just business." I kissed his cheek before he left, inhaling the faint cologne that lingered on his skin. I told myself to be patient, to trust him, to let him enjoy his moment. Hours later, when he returned, his hair damp from the rain, I hung his jacket by the door. A folded slip of paper slid from the pocket and landed at my feet. I bent down and picked it up. It was a receipt. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, candle service charge. I stared at it for a long time. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. When Elias came into the room, I held it up. "Who did you have dinner with?" He froze for the briefest moment, and I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes before he masked it with a smile. "Just a colleague? You know how these things are." "A colleague?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "Yes." His answer was too quick, too smooth. "It's nothing. Don't make a big deal out of it." I wanted to press, to demand the colleague's name, to watch his face and see if the truth cracked through. But I swallowed the words. Confrontation was not in my nature, and Elias knew that. He kissed my forehead, dropped the receipt on the table as though it meant nothing, and disappeared into the bedroom. I stood there for a long time, staring at that slip of paper, wondering when my husband had learned to lie so easily. The lies multiplied after that, each one small enough to dismiss, but heavy enough to weigh on my heart. He said he was working late, but I smelled perfume on his shirt that wasn't mine. He said he was at the gym, but his shoes were too clean. He said his phone had died, but the battery was nearly full when he left it on the counter. I began to notice patterns, how he tilted his phone away from me when messages came, how he lingered in the bathroom with the door locked, how his eyes shifted when I asked about his day. The man who once told me everything, who once laughed with me about the most mundane details of work and life, had become guarded, secretive, He spoke less and less about things that mattered. And when he did, his tone carried an edge, as though my questions were interruptions rather than invitations to share. One night, I tried again. "Elias," I said quietly, as we sat across from each other at the gleaming new dining table. Do you think we're drifting apart?" He looked up from his plate, startled. "What do you mean?" "You're gone so often. You come home late, tired, distracted. We barely talk anymore." My voice trembled. "I miss us." For a moment, I thought I saw something soften in his eyes. But then he sighed, shaking his head. "Mariam, you worry too much. This is what success looks like. It takes work, connections, effort. I'm doing this for us." "For us?" I asked, though it sounded more like a whisper. "Yes." His tone sharpened. "Do you think I enjoy staying out late, attending boring dinners, listening to investors drone on? I'm building a future, a legacy. One day, you'll thank me." I nodded, but inside, I felt hollow. I didn't want a legacy. I wanted my husband. I wanted our dinners of soup and bread, our quiet walks, our laughter echoing in the park. Wealth had given us everything we thought we wanted, yet it had taken away the very thing I cherished most, the closeness that had bound us together. The loneliness began to eat at me. I tried filling the silence with books, with visits to my parents, with afternoons volunteering at the school where I still taught part-time. But the ache lingered, growing heavier each day. When I came home at night, the apartment felt cavernous, echoing with emptiness. The crystal vases, the gleaming furniture, the endless view of the city lights, all of it felt cold, like a museum I was trapped inside. Sometimes I would open the cabinet where I had hidden the chipped ceramic bowl I once made in college. I would hold it in my hands, tracing the uneven edges, remembering how Elias had teased me for its lopsided shape, how he had insisted we use it anyway because it was mine. That bowl had meant more to me than all the crystal in the world. And now, it sat hidden, like the life we had once shared. The first real fight came soon after that. It was late, and I was already in bed when Elias came home, humming softly. His shirt was unbuttoned, his hair slightly mussed. I sat up. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "I told you I had a dinner meeting. At 11 at night? Yes, that's how these things work." I swallowed, my hands twisting in the sheets. "Was it really a meeting, Elias, or are you lying to me?" Silence. His jaw tightened. Then he laughed, though there was no warmth in it. "Mariam, you're imagining things. You've always been too sensitive." The words cut like knives. Too sensitive. As if my fears were nothing but fantasies, as if the ache in my chest were a flaw in me rather than a reflection of what he was becoming. He kissed my cheek, light, dismissive, and turned away, slipping beneath the covers. Moments later, his breathing evened as though he had already forgotten the conversation. But I lay awake, my body rigid, my heart aching. That was the night I realized something had shifted irrevocably. My husband had lied to me, and worse, he had made me doubt myself. It was only the beginning, but already I felt the ground beneath my marriage beginning to crack.
I had always believed that marriage unraveled slowly, thread by thread, 1,000 small cuts, 100 overlooked moments. But when betrayal arrived, it did not creep quietly into my life. It slammed into me, sharp and undeniable, leaving no room for doubt. It started, as so many things do, with intuition. I could feel Elias slipping further from me each day. His excuses grew more polished, his laughter more distant, his time at home shorter. He had a new wardrobe now, tailored suits, silk ties, shoes that gleamed like mirrors. He claimed it was all for business, but the way he adjusted his cufflinks before leaving in the evenings, the way he studied his reflection with a hunger I had never seen before. It wasn't about business. It was about being seen. And he was being seen, just not by me. The confirmation came one quiet afternoon. I had left school early and decided to surprise him at his office. Elias had always loved surprises, or at least he once had. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could remind him of the way things used to be, of the woman who still waited for him at home. When I arrived, the receptionist looked at me strangely. "Mr. Aramian isn't here," she said. "But he told me he'd be working late today," I replied, confused. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. Hesitation, maybe. Pity. "She left hours ago." I thanked her and walked back outside, my heart pounding. I didn't know where to go. My hands trembled as I dialed his number. He didn't answer. I called again. No response. So I wandered. I walked the streets aimlessly until instinct pulled me toward the upscale restaurant he had mentioned before. I don't know why. Perhaps because I had seen too many receipts from places like that. Perhaps because a part of me already knew. And there he was. Through the wide glass windows, I saw him, my husband, sitting at a table with a woman whose laughter sparkled like wine. She was young, much younger than me, her hair spilling down her shoulders in waves of gold. He leaned toward her, his smile bright, his eyes lit in a way they hadn't been for me in years. His hand rested lightly on hers, casual, intimate, as though it belonged there. I froze on the sidewalk, the world around me blurring. Cars passed, voices drifted, but all I could see was that table, that hand, that smile. He wasn't talking to an investor. He wasn't sealing a deal. He was betraying me. I couldn't move. I stood there, watching until the tears blurred my vision. When the woman reached across the table and touched his face, I turned and walked away, my chest hollow, my steps unsteady. I don't remember how I got home. I remember only the feeling, the shattering, the collapse of something I had built my life upon. That night, Elias came home late again. He smelled of cologne and wine, his cheeks flushed. "How was your meeting?" I asked, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "Good," he said easily, loosening his tie. "Promising, actually. Could be a big opportunity." I nodded, staring at him. I wanted to scream, to throw the truth in his face. "I saw you. I saw her. I know." But the words lodged in my throat. A strange numbness spread through me instead, as though my body had shut down to protect me from the pain. In the days that followed, I began to notice more. The messages he typed with his back turned, the way he smiled at his phone, then quickly tucked it away. The new cologne he wore, heavier and sweeter, clinging to his shirts long after he came home. The faint marks on his collar once, a smear of lipstick so pale it could have been mistaken for dust if I hadn't looked closely. He didn't even try very hard to hide it. That hurt the most. There was a part of him, I think, that wanted me to know.
I told myself stories to ease the sting. Maybe it was just a phase. Maybe it was about the money, the rush of attention, the intoxicating power of being wanted. Maybe he would tire of it and come back to me. But deep down, I knew something had shifted between us that could never shift back. One evening, I finally tried to confront him. "Elias," I said, quietly, as he adjusted his tie in the mirror, "are you seeing someone else?" He froze. For a heartbeat, the truth flashed in his eyes, sharp and undeniable. But then he laughed, shaking his head. "Miriam, really, don't be ridiculous." "Don't lie to me," I whispered. He turned, his face hardening. "You're imagining things. You've always had a jealous streak. This money has made you paranoid." The words stung. He wasn't just lying. He was making me doubt myself. He was rewriting the story, turning me into the irrational wife, the oversensitive partner. I wanted to scream. Instead, I lowered my eyes, swallowing the bitterness burning in my throat. Because the truth was clear now. My husband, the man who once promised me forever, was in love with someone else. The affair had begun. I didn't know how far it had gone, or how long it had been happening, but I knew enough. I knew that the man who once held my hand through every hardship, who once looked at me as though I was the only person in the world, was now pouring that love into someone else. And I knew that no amount of money in the world could buy back what I had just lost. That night, after he left again for another meeting, I sat alone in the cavernous apartment. The silence pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I pulled out the old ceramic bowl from the cabinet and placed it on the table. I traced its jagged edge with trembling fingers, tears spilling freely down my face. That bowl had once represented us, imperfect, fragile, but real, and now it felt like a relic of a life that had vanished. I whispered into the emptiness, "Where did you go, Elias?" But the only answer was silence. Suspicion is a strange thing. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It coils itself around your thoughts, presses against your ribs, gnaws at your peace. Even when you try to brush it away, it lingers, patient and persistent. By the time Elias's affair had begun in earnest, I no longer questioned whether he was lying to me. I questioned only how much of the truth he was hiding. The signs multiplied. His phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand or kitchen counter, was now glued to his hand. He set it face down whenever he placed it on a table. He took it with him, even when he showered, leaving me with the bitter knowledge that some conversations were more important to him than anything I might say. The wardrobe changed too. Elias had always been neat, but not extravagant. Now every shirt was tailored, every tie silk, every suit pressed to perfection. He began wearing a cologne I had never smelled before, sharp, intoxicating, unmistakably expensive. The first time he wore it, I asked where it came from. "Gift from a friend," he said lightly. I didn't ask which friend. I didn't need to. There were receipts, too. I found them tucked in pockets, slipped between papers, folded at the bottom of the laundry basket. Expensive restaurants, wine bars, boutique hotels. He never mentioned these places to me, never invited me along. One evening, as I folded his shirts, a receipt slipped out from his jacket pocket. A dinner bill. 2 entrees again. a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce. I held the slip in my hands for a long time, my vision blurring. My heart knew the truth, but my hands still shook with the weight of it. I hid the receipt in the drawer of my nightstand. It joined the others, silent witnesses to the unraveling of my marriage. I began noticing his absence in small, painful ways. The empty chair across from me at dinner, the untouched pillow beside me at night, the unanswered calls when I needed to hear his voice. Once, when I asked where he had been, he smiled and kissed my forehead, telling me not to worry. I'm building a future for us, Mariam. You'll see. But his eyes betrayed him. They flickered, restless, never meeting mine for long. I started watching him more closely. At parties, I noticed how his gaze lingered on women, how easily he laughed at their jokes, how naturally his hand brushed against theirs in conversation. I saw the way his shoulders straightened when they complimented his watch, the way he leaned in when they whispered in his ear. I told myself not to be jealous, but it wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. I knew that look, the look of a man intoxicated by being wanted. And I knew, deep down, that he no longer looked at me that way. One night, after he had fallen asleep, I slipped quietly out of bed and picked up his phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I knew it was wrong. I knew it wasn't who I was, but I also knew I couldn't live in limbo anymore. The messages were there. Her name wasn't saved in his contacts, just a number. But I didn't need a name to know. Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. When will you tell her? You looked incredible tonight. My stomach turned as I scrolled. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. There it was, undeniable, carved into glowing letters on the screen. The words that ended every hope I had clung to. I set the phone down gently, as though handling something poisonous. Then I lay back in bed beside him, my body rigid, my eyes burning. He stirred slightly, sighing in his sleep, his hand brushing against mine. For a moment, I almost let myself believe it was still us, but I knew better. I had just read the truth. The next morning, I didn't mention what I had seen. I couldn't. My voice would have cracked, and he would have denied it anyway. I didn't have the strength for another round of gaslighting, another performance where he twisted my fears into flaws. Instead, I carried the truth in silence. Silence became my armor. I learned to nod at his excuses, to smile when he came home late, to pretend I believed his stories. I became an actress in my own marriage, performing the role of a trusting wife, while inside I withered. But the silence gave me something too: clarity. When you strip away the lies, when you stop grasping at hope, you see the world as it really is. And I saw Elias for who he had become, a man consumed by hunger, intoxicated by wealth, enthralled by the attention of strangers. The man I had married, the man who once held my hand through sleepless nights and whispered promises of forever, was gone. In his place stood someone I didn't recognize. Sometimes I caught glimpses of him, the old Elias. One evening, he came home unexpectedly early. We ate dinner together, just the two of us, like we used to. For a moment, it felt almost normal. He asked about my day, laughed at a story from school, even reached for my hand across the table. My heart ached with longing. I wanted so badly to believe he was still there, buried beneath the greed and deceit. But later that night, when his phone buzzed and his lips curved into a secret smile, I knew. The old Elias wasn't coming back. I began to prepare myself for what was to come, though I didn't know exactly what that was. I gathered the receipts in my drawer, tucked away like ammunition. I replayed the messages I had read until they etched themselves into my mind. I practiced conversations in my head, confrontations, ultimatums, endings. But when he walked through the door each night, charming and confident, I fell silent again. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Suspicion had become certainty, but certainty hadn't yet become action. For now, I waited. For proof strong enough to shatter the lies. For courage fierce enough to face the truth. For the moment when silence would no longer protect me, but destroy me. And deep down, I knew that moment was coming soon.
There comes a point when silence is no longer survival. It is surrender. For weeks, I had carried my suspicions like stones in my chest, heavy and grinding. I had played the role of the patient wife, nodding at excuses, pretending not to see what was in front of me. But stones, when carried too long, either crush you or sharpen into weapons. And I was tired of being crushed. It began with a question, small, almost harmless. "Where were you last night?" I asked it over breakfast, my voice steady, as though I were asking about the weather. Elias paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "With Victor, talking business," he replied easily. I stirred my tea. "Strange. Victor's wife called me yesterday. She said he's been in Vienna this whole week." The spoon slipped from his hand, clinking against the bowl. For a moment his mask cracked, the briefest flicker of panic, before he smoothed it away with a laugh. "Ah, right. I forgot. I must have mixed up the names." I looked at him then. Really looked. His eyes darted, his jaw tightened, and I thought, this is what a liar looks like. I didn't press further then, not that morning, but the seed of confrontation had been planted. The next time came a few days later. He stumbled home after midnight, reeking of cologne and wine. I sat waiting in the living room, the receipts spread neatly on the coffee table before me. He froze when he saw them. "What's this?" he asked, his voice too calm. I folded my hands in my lap. "Evidence." His smile was thin, brittle. "You've been going through my things. You've been lying to me." For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the air between us thick with unspoken truths. Then he laughed, a sharp, cold sound that cut through me. "Ah, you're being paranoid, Mariam. Those are business dinners, nothing more." Business dinners with wine for two? With hotel suites attached to the bill? His smile faltered, his jaw clenched, but he didn't admit it. Not yet. Instead, he leaned back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. "You're imagining things. You've always been too suspicious. You need to trust me." Trust. The word burned like acid. It wasn't a single confrontation, but a series of small wars, each one leaving me more drained, more hollow. There were nights when I tried to speak my heart, to reach for the man I once loved. "Elias, I miss you," I whispered once, lying beside him in bed. "You're here, but you're not with me anymore. What happened to us?" He turned away, his back a wall between us. "You're overthinking. Go to sleep." And there were nights when rage took over. "Don't lie to me," I screamed once, slamming the drawer of receipts onto the table. "Don't stand there and tell me I'm crazy when I can smell her perfume on your jacket." His face hardened, his voice rising to match mine.
You want to fight? Fine. But don't blame me for your insecurities. Do you know how suffocating it is to come home and be interrogated every night? I stared at him, trembling with fury and grief. You broke our marriage, Elias, not me. But he never confessed, not fully. He circled the truth like a predator circles prey, close enough to terrify, but never close enough to kill. And I began to understand something devastating. He didn't need to admit it. I already knew. Every denial was just another blade twisting in me. Every lie was another wall built between us. And yet, I couldn't walk away. Not yet. My love for him, battered and bloodied as it was, still chained me to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he would choose me again. One evening, after another bitter argument, he stormed out of the house. I stood in the doorway, watching his car disappear into the night, my body shaking with rage and despair. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. Instead, I collapsed on the floor, clutching my stomach as though I could hold myself together with my bare hands. How had we come to this? How had the man who once held me through every storm now become the storm itself? The confrontations changed me. At first, I was afraid of losing him, of shattering the fragile image of our marriage. But with each argument, with each denial, something inside me hardened. I realized I wasn't just confronting Elias, I was confronting myself. The woman who had once lived in quiet devotion, who had once accepted half-truths and empty reassurances, was gone. In her place was someone sharper, stronger, unwilling to be deceived. And though Elias couldn't see it yet, that transformation would one day be his undoing. Still, at night, when the house was quiet and my anger subsided into exhaustion, I wept. Because no matter how strong I tried to be, the truth was simple and cruel. I still loved him, and that was the most painful confrontation of all. There is a certain silence that fills a house when love begins to die. It is not the peaceful quiet of comfort, but the suffocating hush of two people who no longer speak the same language. That silence had begun to swallow our home. Elias grew bolder with his lies, or maybe he simply grew careless. At first, he would hide the receipts, change his shirt before coming home, silence his phone when he was near me. Now he barely bothered. He returned late without excuses, his phone buzzing openly on the counter, messages flashing from numbers saved under fake names so obvious it almost felt insulting. He stopped pretending to care what I thought. I suppose he believed that money excused everything, that wealth had made him untouchable, above consequence, above me. At dinners with his new friends, he would dismiss me as though I were nothing more than an accessory. "This is Mariam," he said once at a gathering in our home, his arm draped loosely around my shoulders. "She doesn't understand much about business, but she makes a great home." The laughter that followed stabbed deeper than any knife. I smiled politely, the way I had been taught to in a world where women's worth was measured in silence and grace. But inside, I burned. After the guests left, I confronted him. "Do you realize how humiliating that was?" I demanded. He poured himself a drink, unfazed. "Miriam, for God's sake, calm down." "Don't you dare tell me to calm down," I snapped. "I see you disappearing, Elias. I see you slipping away from me, from us, and I won't let you make me feel insane for knowing the truth." His face hardened, eyes cold as steel. Maybe if you were less suffocating, I wouldn't need to look elsewhere. The words landed like a slap. My breath caught in my throat, my heart splintering under the weight of his cruelty. He didn't apologize. He didn't take it back. He simply walked past me, leaving me standing in the ruins of what used to be our love. It was then I realized something vital. The cracks weren't just widening, they were permanent. No amount of patchwork, no smile, no apology, no memory of better days could mend what was already broken. And yet, part of me still hoped. Because hope, I discovered, is the cruelest chain of all. But hope would not save him. For with every arrogant dismissal, every careless betrayal, Elias was not just breaking our marriage, he was unraveling himself. He didn't see it yet, but the world he thought he owned would one day turn against him. And when it did, I would no longer be standing at his side. I would be free.
There comes a moment when suspicion turns into certainty, when shadows solidify into shapes you can no longer deny. For me, that moment arrived on a rain-soaked Thursday night. Elias had claimed he was at a business dinner, one of the countless he seemed to attend these days. But something in his tone, a brittle edge beneath the casualness, told me otherwise. I told myself not to check. I told myself not to look. But the human heart is a restless detective, unwilling to let lies rest in peace. When his phone buzzed on the counter, I froze. He had left it there, unlocked, screen lit up, as if daring me. Or perhaps because he believed I would never cross the line of trust. The name flashing on the screen was saved as David. But David didn't send messages like that. Can't wait to see you again tonight. Last time wasn't enough. My hands shook. I scrolled further, past the coded names and deleted threads, until the truth unraveled in neon letters. Photos, messages, promises whispered at midnight. Her face staring back at me, young and bright and smug, with the confidence of someone who believes she has won. I felt the air leave my lungs. My knees nearly gave way beneath me. It was all there, every lie, every betrayal, cataloged in digital ink. I don't remember how long I sat there staring at the evidence. Minutes, hours, it didn't matter. Time became a blur of pounding heartbeat and trembling hands. At last, I closed the phone, placed it gently back where he had left it, and walked into the bedroom. The bed smelled faintly of him, of us, and now of her. I pressed my face into the pillow and screamed, muffling the sound so the neighbors wouldn't hear. When Elias returned that night, dripping with rain and arrogance, I was waiting. He tossed his keys on the table, humming as if the world belonged to him. "Why are you awake?" he asked, shrugging off his coat. "Because I know," I said quietly. He froze. "Know what?" "Don't insult me." My voice trembled, but the words were steady. I saw the messages, the pictures, her face. For the first time, his mask cracked. A flicker of panic darted across his eyes before he smoothed it away with practiced calm. "You had no right to go through my phone," he said coldly. I laughed bitterly. "That's all you have to say? That I invaded your privacy after everything you've done to me? You're exaggerating." "Exaggerating?" My voice rose, sharper now, laced with months of swallowed pain. "Do you think I can't tell the difference between business and betrayal? Between a deal and a kiss?" He poured himself a drink, avoiding my gaze. "It's just fun. It doesn't mean anything." Fun. The word shattered something inside me.
Years of love, sacrifice, loyalty, all reduced to nothing more than a game for him? Do you remember when we were first married and had nothing but dreams? Do you remember how we promised to grow old together no matter what? I thought money would make life easier for us. Instead, it destroyed you. His jaw tightened. Don't blame the money. This is who I am. And that was the worst truth of all. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He had chosen this. Chosen her. Chosen betrayal over love. The rain battered against the windows as though the heavens themselves mourned for me. I gave you my whole life, I said softly, brokenly, and you gave me lies. For a moment, I thought I saw regret in his eyes, a flicker of the man I once knew. But then he looked away, sipping his drink, and the flicker died. That was the night I stopped begging for answers, the night I realized the man I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. In the days that followed, everything changed. I no longer searched for proof. I already had it. I no longer clung to hope. It had burned to ash. Instead, I watched him unravel with a strange, quiet clarity. The lies piled up, but they no longer fooled me. The nights away grew longer, but I no longer waited at the window. I began to understand that discovery was not just about finding the truth, it was about finding myself within it. And though it broke me, it also freed me. Because once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. And once you know the depth of betrayal, you can never go back to blindness. That Thursday night became my rebirth. Not because Elias changed, he didn't, but because I did. For the first time, I saw him not as my husband, not as the man I vowed to love forever, but as a liar who had mistaken my loyalty for weakness. And I swore to myself, he would learn the difference.
Betrayal has a sound. It is not always the slam of a door or the shatter of glass. Sometimes it's the quiet clink of ice in a glass of whiskey, the even tone of a man explaining why his sins don't matter. That was Elias, calm, detached, sipping his drink as if my world hadn't just collapsed. The morning after I found the messages, I stood at the kitchen counter, waiting for him to come downstairs. My hands shook as I made coffee, the bitter aroma filling the silence between us. He entered, shirt half-buttoned, tie hanging loose. He looked at me the way one looks at furniture, present, useful, but unremarkable. I didn't sleep, I said, staring into my cup. Then sleep during the day, he replied flatly. It wasn't just indifference, it was dismissal. I slammed the mug down harder than I meant to. Don't you care at all? About me? About us? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Mariam, why do you insist on dramatizing everything? You knew this life would change things. Money changes things. Money didn't cheat on me. You did. He looked up then, his eyes sharp, defensive. So what if I did? Do you want me to beg forgiveness on my knees, to promise it won't happen again? Because I won't lie to you. That cut deeper than anything else. He wasn't pretending. You're choosing her over me, I whispered. No, he said smoothly. I'm choosing myself. For once, I'm living. Do you know how suffocating it was, Mariam? Always scraping, always surviving. Now I can breathe, and if that means I have a little fun, so be it. Fun. Again, that word, that vile, shallow word. So, our marriage is nothing but a cage to you? His silence was answer enough. I felt my chest ache with a pain I couldn't contain. I gave you everything. I stood by you when you had nothing. I believed in you when no one else did. And now that you have money, now that you can finally give us the life we dreamed of, you throw me away like I'm nothing? He pushed back his chair, standing tall, shoulders squared. Don't twist this into some tragic romance. You'll be fine. You'll always be taken care of. Taken care of. As if I were some dependent, a burden he could silence with credit cards and houses. The rage that surged through me then was unlike anything I'd ever felt. I don't want your money, Elias. I wanted your love. But you've sold that too, haven't you? His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. And in his silence, I heard the truth. Yes. Later that week, the final blow came. He came home late again, cologne heavy on his skin, shirt wrinkled in ways that told their own story. I confronted him in the living room. Where were you? He smirked, loosening his tie. You already know. The arrogance, the cruelty. He wanted me to suffer. Her? I demanded. You were with her? Yes. One word, sharp as a knife. And before you ask, no, I'm not ending it. The room spun. My body swayed with the force of the admission. You're throwing away 20 years of marriage for a stranger who only wants you because of your money? He laughed then, an ugly, bitter sound. And what did you want, Mariam? Security, stability. You loved me when I was poor because you thought I was safe, predictable. Well, I'm not anymore, and maybe that scares you. I slapped him before I knew what I was doing. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. My hand burned, but my soul felt colder than ever. For a moment, he looked shocked. Then, slowly, a smirk crept across his face. There she is, the real Mariam, angry, bitter. Maybe you should thank me. I've given you fire again. Tears blurred my vision. You disgust me. He shrugged, already walking away. Then leave. No one's stopping you. That night, I packed a small bag. Not because I was ready to go, my heart wasn't there yet, but because I needed the reminder that I could, that I wasn't trapped. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the man I once adored. He lay beside me, already asleep, his face relaxed, almost boyish in the dark. And that was the cruelest part. He still looked like the man I married, but he wasn't. Not anymore. In the days that followed, our home became a battlefield of silence. He moved through the house with careless ease, whistling sometimes, while I moved like a ghost. The neighbors smiled at us, envious of our wealth, our house, our cars. They had no idea that inside these walls, love had died and betrayal reigned. I wanted to scream it to the world. He is not who you think he is. He is not mine anymore. But instead, I stayed silent, watching, waiting, because betrayal in full isn't just about the act. It's about the moment you realize the person you loved has chosen their own selfishness over your shared life. And Elias had made his choice. That was the night I began to make mine.
Strength doesn't come as thunder. It doesn't arrive with banners or declarations. Sometimes it begins with something as small as breathing through another sleepless night. That's how it started for me, The morning after Elias confessed so casually, so arrogantly, that he wouldn't end his affair, I sat at the kitchen table with my bag still packed by the bedroom door. My coffee grew cold in front of me. My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger, as though it belonged to someone else. I didn't recognize myself anymore. My reflection had become a stranger. Hollow eyes, drawn face, a woman bent by betrayal. But beneath the ruins of who I'd been, there was a flicker, a pulse, something whispering, "You are still here." I began small. I went for a walk. Just around the block, nothing grand, but it was the first step I'd taken in weeks that wasn't shadowed by him. The sun was warm on my skin, the trees rustled in the late summer breeze, and for a moment I remembered a time when my world wasn't measured by Elias's moods or choices. For the first time in months, maybe years, I breathed freely. That day, I called Anahit. She'd been my closest friend once, before Elias's money created a chasm between us. I had avoided her out of shame, afraid she'd see through the facade I was trying so hard to keep up. But now, I needed her. When she answered, her voice was the same, steady, familiar, kind. I broke down before I even finished the first sentence. "I can't do this anymore. He's not the man I married. He doesn't even care." Her silence was heavy, but not judgmental. Then, "Mari, come over. You don't need to explain. Just come." I did. Sitting in her kitchen, surrounded by the smell of freshly baked bread and the clutter of children's drawings taped to the fridge, I felt something I hadn't in months: safety. She held my hand as I told her everything, every detail, every lie, every wound. And when I finished, expecting pity, she only said, "He doesn't define you. You hear me? You are not just his wife. You are Mariam. Don't forget that." The words shook me, because she was right. I had forgotten. From that day, I began reclaiming pieces of myself. I went back to painting, something I'd abandoned long ago when survival left no room for hobbies. My canvases were raw, chaotic, streaks of black, red, blue. Pain bled onto them, but so did hope. I joined a yoga class too, just to be around other women, to move my body for myself. It wasn't about fitness, it was about remembering I existed outside of Elias's orbit. Each small act felt like gathering broken shards of glass, cutting my fingers, but slowly shaping them into something whole again. At home, Elias barely noticed. He was too busy with late nights, too consumed by his glittering new world. Sometimes he would glance at my paintings and scoff. "Since when are you an artist?" "Since always," I'd reply quietly, not needing his approval anymore. He didn't realize it, but his absence gave me room to breathe, to grow, to remember. The ring was the hardest part. One evening, I sat at the vanity, staring at it. That circle of gold had once meant forever, A bond, a promise. Now it felt like a chain. With trembling fingers, I slid it off. My skin tingled where it had rested for 2 decades. I placed it in the jewelry box and closed the lid. The silence that followed was deafening and liberating. The turning point came when I attended a gallery opening with a Nahit. The room was full of laughter, clinking glasses, vibrant colors splashed across canvas. For the first time in so long, I wasn't someone's wife. I wasn't Mrs. Elias the Successful. I was just Mariam, a woman looking at art, a woman who had her own thoughts, her own opinions, her own worth. That night, as we walked home, Ani said, "You look lighter." And I realized she was right. Strength isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to stand up every morning, even when grief tries to pin you down. It's the courage to paint, to walk, to laugh again, even when your heart is cracked. It's the whisper that says, "You still matter." I wasn't healed yet, far from it, but I was no longer broken, and that was enough to begin.
When you've lived with someone for over 20 years, you learn to read the smallest shifts in their voice, their posture, the way they move through a room. Even in our estrangement, I could sense Elias's unraveling long before it showed to the world. It was in the way he slammed doors harder than necessary, how his phone calls, once long and confident, became clipped, tense. He started pacing at night, muttering numbers under his breath. The empire he had built on charm and luck was beginning to show cracks. At first, it was whispers, a business deal gone wrong, a partner pulling out, a lawsuit simmering in the background. I heard fragments in his phone calls, caught the strain in his tone. He never admitted it to me, of course. He still carried himself with the arrogance of a man untouchable, but the late nights grew later, the alcohol stronger, the silences heavier. And then came the arguments with her, the mistress. I could hear them through the walls when he thought I was asleep. She wasn't satisfied with promises anymore. She wanted stability, her name on deeds, her future secured. He promised her the world, but I knew better. Elias was running out of worlds to give. The first public crack came at a charity gala. He had insisted I attend, though by then we were more like co-inhabitants than husband and wife. I went only for appearance's sake, for the sake of dignity. Under the crystal chandeliers, Elias looked dashing, as always. Tailored suit, practiced smile, but his laugh was too loud. His grip on his champagne glass too tight. I watched him from across the room, watched how the investors who once clung to his every word now shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away. And then, in front of a cluster of them, he stumbled. Literally. The man who had once exuded effortless confidence lost his footing and sent his drink crashing to the floor. It wasn't the fall that mattered. It was the silence that followed. For the first time, Elias looked small. After that night, the descent was faster. The lawsuits multiplied. His so-called friends disappeared one by one. Deals collapsed. His mistress grew impatient, her affection waning as quickly as his bank account. I didn't gloat. Strange as it sounds, watching him crumble didn't fill me with satisfaction. Instead, I felt a hollow sorrow, like watching a man drown in a sea he himself had stirred. But I also felt distance. His fall no longer belonged to me. It wasn't my burden to carry.
One evening, he stormed into the house, his tie undone, his face red with anger. "She left me," he spat, collapsing into a chair. "After everything, after all I gave her, she just walked away, like I was nothing." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, silent. What could I say? He looked up at me then, truly looked at me for the first time in months. His eyes were bloodshot, desperate. "Miriam," he whispered, "you're all I have left." The irony of it nearly made me laugh, but instead I answered simply, "No, Elias, you were all I had once, and you threw me away." He flinched, as though I'd struck him. The weeks that followed were filled with collectors calling, lawyers knocking, assets vanishing like smoke. The luxury cars disappeared from the driveway one by one. The glittering house grew emptier, echoing with silence, and Elias shrank with it. His suits no longer fit, too loose now, as though even his body was retreating from him. His hair grayed faster, his shoulders hunched. The man who once walked into every room as though he owned it now shuffled like a ghost through his own halls. One night, I found him sitting alone in the living room, staring at nothing. The only light came from the dying embers in the fireplace. He didn't notice me first. He just whispered, almost to himself, "Where did it all go?" I wanted to tell him. I wanted to list every choice, every betrayal, every blind indulgence, but I didn't. Instead, I said softly, "It was never yours to keep. Not the money, not the women, not even me." He looked up then, his eyes wet with something that might have been regret or just self-pity. But I didn't stay to decipher it. I turned and walked away. By the end of that year, Elias was a shell. The papers that once sang his praises now tore him apart. His name, once synonymous with fortune, became a cautionary tale. His mistress was seen on the arm of another man, younger and richer. His empire was dismantled, sold off piece by piece. And I was free. For the first time in years, I was not tethered to his chaos. I was not the shadow of his choices. I was simply Miriam, standing in the ruins, but no longer afraid. Because his downfall was not mine. It never had to be. There comes a point in grief where silence becomes unbearable. I had been silent for too long. Silent when Elias lied. Silent when he strayed. Silent when his empire grew so tall that I could no longer see the man beneath it. But silence is a kind of death, and I was done dying beside him. The first step was small, almost laughably so. I started taking morning walks. At first, just around the neighborhood, circling the manicured hedges and abandoned smiles of the wealthy who still clung to their status. My steps were slow, tentative, like a child relearning to walk. But each day, the rhythm of my feet against the pavement reminded me that I was still here, that my life hadn't ended with Elias's betrayal. And then, one morning, I walked past the art center in town. There was a flyer taped to the door. Oil painting classes. Beginners welcome. I hadn't painted in decades, not since university, before I married Elias. Back then, I would lose hours in front of a canvas, coaxing color into form. I had given it up when life became about bills, children, keeping house, supporting Elias's dreams. I stood there, staring at that flyer, until the paper curled in the breeze. And for the first time in years, I wanted something for myself. Walking into that class was like stepping into sunlight after years underground. The room smelled of turpentine and linseed oil, sharp and raw. Brushes stood in jars like bouquets, their tips frayed with use. A dozen students sat before easels, some laughing nervously, others already lost in their strokes. When I picked up a brush again, my hand trembled. The first line I painted was uneven, shaky, but it didn't matter. The canvas didn't judge. It simply received. And as colors bloomed beneath my hand, I felt something unfurl inside me, a quiet joy long forgotten. Of course, Elias noticed the change. One evening, when he returned home later than usual, his suit wrinkled and his face haggard, he found me washing paint from my fingers at the sink. "What's this?" he asked, gesturing at the smudges of color on my sleeve. "Paint," I said simply. He frowned. "Since when do you paint?" "Since always. I just stopped for too long." He didn't reply, but the bewilderment in his eyes was unmistakable, as if he couldn't fathom a version of me that wasn't orbiting around him. As weeks turned into months, I built a new rhythm. Morning walks, painting classes, coffee with other women who had become friends, not just acquaintances. I laughed again, sometimes so suddenly it startled me. I began volunteering at the Arts Center, helping children with their first messy brushstrokes. Their laughter filled the spaces inside me that Elias's betrayal had hollowed out. And then came the day one of my pieces, a stormy seascape, was chosen for a local gallery exhibition. Standing in front of that painting, my name printed neatly beneath it, I felt a swell of pride I hadn't felt in years. Not because of Elias, not because of his money, but because of me. Meanwhile, Elias's world continued to shrink. He moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding mirrors, avoiding me. His mistress had long abandoned him. His wealth had dwindled to scraps. The phone that once rang with invitations now buzzed only with demands. Lawyers, banks, collectors. One evening, he found me preparing a canvas in the dining room. He stood in the doorway, hollow-eyed. "You seem happy," he said, his voice flat. "I am," I answered, without hesitation. He blinked, as if the word itself was foreign. How? After everything, how can you be? I looked at him then, truly looked, and realized something startling. I no longer feared him. I no longer needed him. Because happiness isn't something you buy, Elias. It's something you choose. He didn't reply. He just turned away, shoulders bent, as though the truth itself was too heavy to bear. The final severing came quietly. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror, fastening a delicate silver necklace my daughter had given me. I studied my reflection, lines of grief etched around my eyes, yes, but also strength, resilience, life. And I realized I didn't want to carry his name anymore. The next week, I filed for divorce. There were no screaming arguments, no dramatic confrontations. Elias was too drained to fight. He signed the papers with a shaking hand, barely glancing at the lines that ended us. When it was done, I walked out of that courthouse into the sharp sunlight, and for the first time in decades, I felt the weight lift. I was Miriam again, not Mrs. Elias, not the wife of a millionaire, not the shadow of betrayal, just me. And that was enough. In the months that followed, my life blossomed. I rented a small studio near the art center, filled it with canvases and light. I began selling my work, modestly at first, then steadily more. My paintings hung in living rooms and offices, carried pieces of my soul into homes of strangers who saw something of themselves in my colors. And in the quiet evenings, when I closed the studio and walked home under the fading glow of street lamps, I felt peace. Not the fragile peace of pretending everything was fine, as I once had with Elias, but a true, steady peace, the kind that comes from surviving fire and finding yourself whole on the other side. Sometimes I still saw him, a fleeting glimpse at the market, his shoulders hunched, his clothes worn. Or I'd hear from mutual friends about his latest fall down, another failed scheme, another bridge burned. I didn't hate him, not anymore. He had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine, and mine was no longer bound to him. Liberation is not loud. It is not fireworks or applause. Liberation is walking into a sunlit room with paint on your hands and knowing the world is wide and waiting. It is laughing freely, loving yourself wholly. It is no longer asking for permission to exist. And as I dipped my brush into deep cobalt one afternoon, letting the first stroke bloom across the canvas, I knew I had finally come home to myself.
Years have a way of softening even the sharpest wounds. Not erasing them. No, betrayal leaves its marks, faint scars beneath the skin, but softening them, turning them into something you carry with grace rather than agony. It has been almost a decade since Elias and I parted ways. I am 61 now. My hair, once thick and black, carries streaks of silver that glint proudly in the sunlight. My hands, lined with time, still know the language of brushes, still coax beauty from blankness. I live in a smaller house now, perched on a hill overlooking the town. It's modest, warm, filled with books and canvases and plants that trail like green waterfalls from the windowsills. I chose it because the light floods in through wide glass panes every morning, bathing everything in gold. It is not wealth, but it is abundance. My art has grown in ways I never imagined. What began as therapy bloomed into vocation. Galleries across the country now carry my work. Some of my paintings hang in homes of people I've never met, who write to me about how the storm in the brushstrokes mirrored their own storms, how the light in the corner reminded them of hope they thought they'd lost. Sometimes, when I'm invited to exhibitions, I stand quietly in the crowd, watching strangers stare at my canvases, unaware that the woman sipping wine beside them is the one who painted their depths. It feels like a secret joy. I built this life with my own 2 hands, no husband's money, no man's shadow, just me and the colors I coaxed back into my world. And Elias? I hear of him occasionally. He never left this town, though he drifts through it like a forgotten rumor. The last I saw him was 3 years ago at the market. He was hunched over, his hair thin and gray, his eyes bloodshot with the exhaustion of years spent chasing what always slipped away. He was buying cheap wine and bread. When his gaze accidentally met mine, for a moment I saw the flicker of the man I once knew, the boy who laughed with me on park benches, the husband who held my hand when our daughter was born. But then it was gone, replaced by bitterness, by a hollow shell that wealth had carved out and then abandoned. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. We didn't need to.
The silence between us was louder than any confrontation. Sometimes people ask me if I ever forgave him. Forgiveness is a complicated thing. I don't excuse what he did. The lies, the cheating, the cruelty, they cut deep. But I also refuse to let those wounds define me. So yes, in my own way, I forgave him. Not for his sake, but for mine. To put down the weight of anger and walk lighter into my own future. I never remarried. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. My life is full, with my daughter and her children, with students who come to my studio eager to learn, with friends who know me as Mariam, not as anyone's wife. Love exists here woven through every laugh, every brushstroke, every sunrise I watch from my hill, and that is enough. One spring afternoon, not long ago, I received a letter. The envelope was smudged, the handwriting shaky but unmistakable. Elias. My hands trembled as I opened it, though my heart remained strangely calm. He wrote of regret, of mistakes he could never undo. He wrote of loneliness, of nights spent remembering what we once had. And at the end, in lines that grew almost illegible, he asked for forgiveness. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't write back, not out of cruelty, but because some chapters do not need reopening. Some stories end where they are meant to. He had chosen his truth long ago, and I had chosen mine. Now when I sit in my studio, surrounded by the scent of oil paint and turpentine, I sometimes catch myself smiling. I survived him. I survived the lies, the affairs, the crumbling of a life I thought was unshakable. And not only did I survive, I flourished. I built a life that is mine alone, filled with color, love, and freedom. If there is one thing I would tell the woman I used to be, the one who once sat in the kitchen floor, weeping over receipts and lipstick stains, it would be this: you will rise. He may break your heart, but he will not break you. The day will come when you will thank yourself for walking away, for choosing you. And so I live quietly now, painting, teaching, loving. Elias remains a ghost, wandering through the remnants of the empire he once built. His story is one of warning, mine of rebirth. The last lie he ever told me was that I couldn't live without him, and every day since, I have proven him wrong.
Hello! If you like stories like this, subscribe to this channel to not miss new videos.